You had lunch, sir?
Hmm?
Lunch. But Pujari, I missed out. He wanted to come actually.
Oh, Pujari is also
Yeah.
appearing.
Sixteenth floor, signal.
How did you go from Chennai to Pune? Direct flight?
This is a direct flight, sir.
Ah,
That is ready.
That is already started.
what is this for? Same,
Same.
different angle.
No, this is a recording. This is live. Oh, as a backup, I'm just keeping that.
Oh, back up.
Because this is from the internet connections. But your thing is.
Getting it.
Huh?
Net problem.
Yeah, we'll have that. Then we'll shift that phone here. Yeah, go.
Working.
Yeah.
Live.
No, no, sir. This is recording.
Still can't do it.
Yeah. So I have a great pleasure in introducing to you Professor Samiran Nundy, a living legend in the field of surgery, not just in the field of surgery in terms of medical writing, medical ethics, and media. And I had the pleasure of working under him as a trainee many years ago, and it's been very nice to consent to spending a couple of minutes with us, Professor Nundy.
I'm very happy to be here, especially with Dr. Radhakrishna, who I always remember has organized a wonderful conference in Chennai about 2 years ago, not only about surgery in particular, but attitudes to surgery in general. And it'd be very interesting to talk to him.
Sir, how did you decide on taking up surgery as a career? At what point did you really decide?
I, in fact, had a very kind of refined education. My parents were very well off. I went to a school, boarding school in Darjeeling, which was run all by English teachers. And the headmaster, who's a real inspiration, said that you people who are privileged should do something which for people who are less privileged than you. And I, in fact, got into Cambridge. I wanted to become a diplomat. And but then at the last minute, I decided to do medicine, basically to help the poor in villages in India. I had no idea what villages were about. But so I did, in fact, to be equipped to do surgery in villages. I did MRCP. I trained in medicine and then I did surgery. So I wanted to be the complete kind of doctor for a village. Now this is a very, people don't believe me, but it's a very strange ambition to have. But I got sucked into the kind of, the excellent surgical ambition. And I worked in Cambridge, London, and my last job was in Harvard, in Mass General. And in fact, I had a green card. But my wife, who was an Indian, who was married, to whom I was very patriotic, and she wanted to come back to India. I tried, but she got me the job through influence, and I worked in All India Institute, and that's my story. It wasn't that I particularly wanted to do surgery as a specialty. I wanted to help the poor in villages, but I've gone very far from that.
How was the undergraduation? How was it different from the undergraduation in India?
Undergraduation in Cambridge was very different in that, for instance, we were all very privileged, and I was in a college. In Cambridge, there are different colleges. There's not a medical college. There are people who do medicine in a centralized kind of pool. And there are only 25 medical students in my college called Gonville and Keys. But it was famous for medicine. And but we were very privileged. I went there, and the porters at the gate took off their hats to me and said, "Welcome, sir." They were always calling me sir. And then I had a suite of 3 rooms, quite a nice suite, at the age of 17 and a half. And all the notices there were that gentlemen are requested to do something. So I think the difference between India and Cambridge especially is that in Cambridge the undergraduates are respected by everyone and they're called gentlemen. And so because you're treated well, I think you also treat others well. I think it's a good system.
Now, you're one of the very few in India with both an MRCP and an FRCS. There's a handful of them. And so initially you trained to be a physician and somewhere switched careers.
Yeah, I trained to be a physician mainly because I wanted to come and help the villagers. So I thought that doing an MRCP would be good. And also in my undergraduate days, I got the top gold medals in medicine. And they all wanted me to be a physician. So I thought that I'll try my MRCP. If I had failed, I would have become a physician. But since I passed quickly, I became a surgeon. I trained in surgery.
How was your surgical training? Was it very rigorous or methodical? What is so special about it?
My surgical training was in England and America. In England, I worked in Guy's. I got the top job in surgery in Guy's. I then worked in Cambridge with Sir Roy Khan, and I was there in the first liver transplant, when I was a registrar with him. And I remember the clamp slipping off the vena cava, a huge amount of blood, and but the patient survived. But Roy Khan was very outstandingly talented. I mean, he was good at squash, he was good at tennis, he was a very good painter, and he used to work fantastically hard. So we all had to work very hard with him, with all these liver cases. And I learned then that there's nothing which is a substitute for hard work. You don't have to be very clever. If you work hard, you can attain what you want to attain.
And how did you develop interest in gastrointestinal surgery?
Yes. Well, my specialty in medicine was gastroenterology for my MRCP. And I'd worked with Sir Christopher Booth at Hammersmith, who was a great gastroenterologist. And he's the person who discovered that vitamin B12 and bile acids were absorbed in the terminal ileum. And because I'd done gastroenterology, and I realized that in India, when I came back, and I found that the vast majority of people who went to general medical OPD had gastrointestinal diseases. And at that time, endoscopy was coming up, complications for endoscopy coming up, there was portal hypertension. All these things suggested that there should be a concentrated effort to work on GI surgery. And therefore, I confined myself to GI surgery.
What are the initial days in liver transplantation, which is happening for the first time in the
and
world?
then I think that when GI surgery was created with a lot of resistance, I think it was one of the first three departments in the country after Dr. Rangabasham. After Dr. Rangabasham, I think G.V. Pant and us were about the same time. Then we, Piyush Sani, Girish Pandey and I, they were residents then. And I said that no GI surgery will be complete without liver transplant. And we should start preparing the country for liver transplant.
Actually, I was asking about your initial days into transplant back in the UK. How was the activity that time? Was there a frenzy?
Yeah, it was a very new thing, liver transplant. And people in Cambridge, they used to say that any blood which is seeping out of the operation theatre, it must be a liver transplant. And 30, 40 units of blood were used at that time. And obviously the techniques were improving. And now a lot of liver transplants are done without any blood at all. It shows that the more you do of a certain procedure, the better you get, and you make innovations to make the results better.
Why did you go to the US? What is that extra thing you want to train in US?
The reason I went to the US was because when I was in Hammersmith as a senior registrar, which was quite a good post, the professor of surgery at AIMS came, and I told him I wanted to go back to India, and he said that, okay, we'll give you a job as assistant professor. So I resigned from my job at Hammersmith, and but the job never turned up. And eventually when I rang him up, he said that I'm sorry, but there's no job. So really it was my first experience with India, where people promise you jobs and don't deliver. In contrast, I was giving a talk at the Surgical Research Society in Britain, which was a very prestigious kind of talk, the plenary session. And I gave the talk on partial vagotomy in dogs, which I'd done for my thesis in Cambridge. And after the talk, a person came up to me and he said that my name is Gerald Austin, and I'm head of surgery at the Massachusetts General. And I hear that you wanted to go back to India, but you couldn't. I was sitting next to your boss, who's called Professor Wellborn, and we'd like to offer you a job as assistant professor at Harvard. So the only reason I went to America was because I was offered this job. And the funny thing was, first of all, that they kept their word, and second is that they got me a green card within 3 months, and I went to America on a green card. So I didn't have to apply, nothing. But I gave up that green card immediately I came back to India.
And what is that new or special you learned in America as far as surgery is concerned?
In Mass General, which was different from America, and it's in those days and now it is the top hospital in the US. The surgery was really of very high standard. It was divided into different specialties, and my boss called Ronald Bolt was a GI surgeon, and that's the other reason why I wanted to set up GI surgery in India, because I worked for him as GI surgeon. So there was a lot of interest in research and publication, and I did a lot of studies on gut hypertrophy in rats and mice, and I published these in gastroenterology. And I think that obviously it's too much concentration on research, but I think in Harvard especially that you have to divide your time into half clinical care and half research, and unless you publish, you're out. So they are very keen on people doing research, and that is the main difference between England and America.
Now, how was the reception in India? Because when they see a young surgeon who's very hardworking, systematic, did you find obstacles?
Yeah, I think everyone hated me, especially the head of the department. And in fact, I had great difficulty getting promoted. And I was promoted, I was an assistant professor for 12 years. But I must tell you the story of how I got the job. I told you that my wife came back to India. She was doing some research on social mobility in Bengal for a PhD in England, in London. And she saw an advertisement for All India Institute. And she sent it to me, and she said, "You better apply." I applied. And then I came for the interview, and I stayed with a friend of mine who was in the Foreign Service, who was Mrs. Gandhi's press secretary. And when I came, he said, I came down and I found that he was ringing up every person on the selection committee, saying his name was S.K. Singh, who became Foreign Secretary later, and I'm Mrs. Gandhi's press secretary. My friend is applying for the job, and I would be grateful if you could see justice is done. When I saw this, I was horrified. And I said, I don't want the job like that. He said, you'll never get the job otherwise. And when I came, he said that nobody wants you. And this is one of the problems of India. They don't have lateral entry. Although this wasn't very lateral, because I was starting at the bottom. But I don't think I could have got the job without that. I started off in an unethical way.
Yeah. And now, how long it took you in All Indian Institute to start a separate GI surgery?
It took 10 years. And the reason it started was because I was really supported by Dr. B.N. Tandon. Dr. B.N. Tandon was one of the most brilliant gastroenterologists I've ever worked for, and he supported me throughout. He sent patients to me, and in fact, when he was the dean, GI surgery started, and he gave us 6 of his beds in AB2 ward to start.
How did you choose focus areas like portal hypertension, ulcerative colitis, and eventually transplantation How did you get the special interest in these specific areas?
Well, the reason I chose portal hypertension was not because I chose it, but it chose me. And I had worked with Linton, who had this Linton shunt. And I was coming down the stairs one day, and Dr. Tandon told me that they had a person who needed a portosystemic shunt, and could I do it? Now, I had never done, to be fair and honest, I'd never done one on my own before. And I didn't know, I couldn't sleep at night. I wondered whether I should try it on cadavers. Then I wondered whether it should, practice on some other thing. But then I thought that people were already hostile to me. But I did the operation by looking at books in those days, Robin Smith and all that. And it was surprisingly easy. I did a portocable shunt on a person called Vishnu, who had non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis, and he did well. After that, I found that most people in India who needed shunts had extrahepatic obstruction. So you had to do a much more difficult procedure called a linorenal shunt. Anastasizing the splenic vein to the renal vein. And my first operation took 17 hours. And people used to say that he should have an L plate. And then I started doing operations in the emergency. And in the emergency, out of the first 11, 7 died. And then really it was a problem, because I don't think that you just have to be a skilled surgeon. You have to be persistent and not worry about criticism. But in the elective situation, out of 49 patients, first 49, none died. And that was very good results for portal hypertension. But this wasn't because I was a skilled surgeon, but because the patients had good liver function and they're very young. And this is the first time, I think, that anyone in the world knew that in India, portal hypertension has very different causes. It affects young people and affects the poor. And that, because in the first year I did 7 operations, the second year I did 12, and eventually used to do 90 per year, 90 operations for portal hypertension per year.
You pioneered the organ transplantation bill in India. We worked very hard on it. What was your experience? Can you describe your experience in formulating the bill and getting it through?
I think the most people ask me what has been the greatest achievement of my career. And I think the greatest achievement of my career was that so many people have trained with me and have become much better than I am in their own fields. And really I'm very proud of that everyone, so many people who have worked with me have become so big in surgery, in GI surgery.
You've been a very strict disciplinarian. We all used to dread spending time with you, and you always led by example. When you walk into the ward, it's 8 o'clock. And, on a particular day, half a day, you'll be telephone you saying there's a problem, then you are there in 5 minutes time. Not once, twice, thrice in a night. I mean, how did you inculcate and how did you continue to be so much of disciplinarian yourself?
No, I think that I was used to that. And I also had the principle that in emergency, if a person had a chance of dying, I would do the operation. So I would take the blame. And I think that stood me in good stead, not only because of my reputation with my residents, but because I became a better surgeon. I am not very good with my skills, but with practice you become better and better. I don't have that much inherent ability, but I think that I'm a hard-working person.
You are an eminent writer with excellent writing skills and English. How did you develop that, which most doctors do not have that ability? How?
In English? Yeah, I think that I read a lot and also I wrote a lot. And when I was in school, I edited I started the school magazine, which is still in existence. So I love editing and writing. And I think that the more you read, the more you write, the more. And I spent a long time in England, in a very prestigious places.
So this social justice is something which will come out of somebody who suffered the effects of social injustice. You've been a well-to-do and a prime person. Why did you think of social justice from your younger days? What made you think so? Have you seen any poverty like Gautama Buddha or anything like that?
Yeah, I think that I'm very keen on not helping the rich. I mean, the rich come to me. If they come to me, then I would operate on them. But I'm much more keen on setting an example. For instance, in Gangaram, we have 20% of our beds which are completely free, and 50% are subsidized. But I make a rule to see all the free patients every day. And if there are any, are the same as I would for well-off. But I'm not saying that I treat everyone the same, because we have many VVIPs, and those people, I think, have to have more visits by me. Why? Not only because otherwise you'll be called anyway. The second is to protect residents from being criticized.
Now, you're a great advocate of medical ethics. That's very closer to your heart, and you call a spade, and you're not bothered about any criticism in any forum. You're not worried about, scared of anyone, as a matter of fact, when it comes to medical ethics. How was that you have such a great regard for that?
No, but I've written also that in India, that the first thing that I experienced that worried me was not the lack of. We had very poor housing in All India Institute. We had 900 rupees a month. But I think the whole place, there was so much corruption. And I thought that part of my job was to try and fight against corruption. And that is one of the reasons why Indian medicine has been kept back. And if there was a meritocracy in India and we promoted people who were really good, I think that we'd be the best in the world. Because generally, I find that in India, people have a much stronger background in culture than in Britain and America. And they also respect teachers more than in Western countries. And I think that they revere teachers, whereas it's not the case. In America, of course, it's how much money you earn, and in Britain, there's a very strong class system. So I think in India, the fact that we respect teachers, we are very keen on culture, we have a lot of poor people to treat, that being a doctor is the best job in the world.
Now, there are a lot of young residents, registrars and students in our learning general surgery, and one of the common questions they keep asking is, how should I choose a certain super specialty? Because I really do not know which one to choose. What would you advise them?
Well, unfortunately, and I would say this, that gastrointestinal surgery is the most difficult super specialty to get in now. And it's certainly the best to do. Why? People now, I mean, I've been counseling for the National Board, and in the first 40, I think about 32 chose GI surgery. And by the time it was 2 o'clock or something, all the seats had gone. And I think GI surgery, one, it's very common. 2, there's a lot of laparoscopy now. And 3rd is there's liver transplant. So all these things together, and also it's very prevalent in India. All these things together make it a very, very attractive specialty. but it's very difficult to get into because of its popularity.
Now, after doing MCH surgical gastroenterology, one is never a complete surgeon. What would you advise a registrar that how long should he train, where should he train, when should he become independent?
When should he?
Become independent and start doing things
I
on his
think
own.
that you should work under a good mentor, and you should work for many years under a good mentor. And to go independently, I don't know how much it would take. I would think it would take 10 years or so, because by that time only would you be able to be self-confident, and because there's so many complications. For instance, even now, our operations for pancreatitis, pancreatic necrosis, we'd get a mortality of between 30 and 40%. I mean, Whipples and liver resection, all that, mortalities come right down. But there's so many problems that we still have to face that we haven't solved.
Now, how should one choose a particular place or a hospital to work for good?
I once worked with a person who was president of the Royal College of Surgeons called Lord Brock. He was a lord. And he was a cardiothoracic surgeon who started this Brock procedure, which was treatment of Fallot's tetralogy. And he told me, I got a job in Cambridge to teach anatomy, and I asked him whether I should do that. So he said, you should do it because, number one, surgeons should know anatomy properly, and second is that it's better to sweep the floor of a good hospital in a good teaching center than it is to be king of some small place. And you should not suddenly become elevated to be head of a department in a useless hospital.
How should one keep up to date in surgical techniques, surgical knowledge?
I think it's important to read one general medical journal and one specialist medical journal every week. And I tend to look at the BMJ, with which I am closely associated. And I was on the editorial board for a long time. And BMJ Lancet New England Journal, I slipped through. And I look at Annals of Surgery and British Journal of Surgery. And if I do a lot of internet searching and searches.
What is your nowadays? More and more women are coming into surgery. Percentage is increasing all over the country. What is your advice? Because do you believe that they should spend equal time at home and the workplace, or you have anything special to tell them? Because they all look up to you as to what will your advice to them as far as their career is concerned.
Which for girls?
Girls, yes, in surgery.
I think that, in fact, we recently did a journal scan on are female surgeons better than male surgeons. And at the moment I have a girl called Smita who's with me, and there's a study published in BMJ, British Medical Journal, from Toronto, which looked at the mortality of operations done by females and males with the same background on the same kind of patients. And the mortality in females was, in the female surgeons, was 11.4. This includes emergency, everything. And the mortality in males was 11.7, and was statistically significantly different. And the president of the Royal College of Surgeons was asked to comment, who's called Claire Marks, who's a woman. And she said she said it's unlikely that females are better than males, and there's no point in researching this. But I think that females, their male partners, their husbands, should help in looking after children, and they should be encouraged to come into surgery. Now, in most countries, including India, proportion of female medical students has increased tremendously. So now in America it's now 57% and India is now about 45%. But very few do surgery and very few do GI surgery. And one of the reasons for that is that there's so much work, and if the child is sick, then the poor old mother has to take time off, and the father would very rarely do that. We have to have a change in culture.
Now, how do you unwind? Because surgeons, they have to unwind. There should be some method.
Yeah, I used to play the classical guitar, and I used to love playing the classical guitar, but became tone deaf. So now I just read a lot. I don't watch television. I browse the net, surf the net.
But you were playing shuttle badminton at one point of time, I remember.
I used to what?
Shuttle badminton?
Yeah, no, I used to play badminton a lot, and tennis, and squash I used to play. I used to play with my college. So I used to be quite interested in sport before, but obviously now I do the net.
So what is the